I'm so glad to welcome you to this second talk and a view from inside the CIA and FBI with our wonderful partner, Smithsonian Associates. Last week, we heard a lot about the FBI from Mike German, and today we're going to take a deep dive into the CIA with Darrell Blocker. Darrell recently completed a 32-year career in the U.S. intelligence community, and he earned the CIA's Distinguished Career Intelligence Medal upon his retirement. He served 4 years as an analyst in the U.S. Air Force from 1987 to 1990, and 28 years as a CIA operative from 1990 to 2018. His career highlights include serving as chief of the CIA's iconic training facility, which I cannot mention by name today, the deputy director of the Counterterrorism Center, chief of Africa Division, and multiple tours as a chief of station. At the time of his retirement in October of 2018, Darrell was the most senior Black officer in the CIA's Directorate of Operations. He's lived and worked in 10 foreign countries, including Italy, Okinawa, South Korea, Niger, Senegal, Morocco, Nigeria, Uganda, Pakistan, and Switzerland. He has also spent time in Somalia after Black Hawk Down and in Burundi after the Hutu-Tutsi massacres. He managed the intelligence community response to the Ebola virus outbreak in West Africa in 2014, so might have a coronavirus question for him after that. In November of 2019, Darrell was appointed Chief Operating Officer of Mosaic, a boutique crisis management intelligence and advisory firm. He's also an ABC News contributor and consultant for CT Watch, a global solutions provider of training and consulting in counterterrorism, security, and intelligence. So I'm hoping he'll also share some stories with us of his musical cover career in Uganda. Thank you, Darrell.
This is surreal. Good morning. Since it's Black History Month, I want to start with a little bit of history of Black History Month because it's important for people to understand that Black history is American history. I've always felt that. My parents felt that. My grandparents felt that. So Black History Month started as an idea in 1926, and it was many years later in 1970 when Kent State University Black Student Union actually recognized Black History Week at that time. Gerald Ford, as president in 1976 during the bicentennial, officially recognized it, but it wasn't until 1985 in the state of Georgia, my state, when Martin Luther King was celebrated as a state holiday in 1985, and it became nationwide in 1986. And I bring up this story because for a couple of reasons. I was a junior at the University of Georgia when, in January of 1985, I was sitting in the cafeteria, and I was with my roommate, and we were all excited. It was the first time that MLK was being recognized as the first Black leader in our history with a federal holiday, and everybody was just abuzz. And there was this one table of four guys sitting next to him, and they were having a similar conversation. Similar only in the sense that we were both talking about Martin Luther King. And then I heard one of the guys say, maybe we should shoot 4 more of them and make a week out of it. And same reaction you just had, and I wasn't sure that I heard what I thought I heard. And I saw one guy kind of glance over because there was a Black guy at the next table, and I said, well, what do you mean by that? And the guy was like, well, why don't we recognize Kennedy as a holiday? I said, first of all, he's from Massachusetts. He's not from Georgia. And it's not really relevant to the discussion. This isn't about Kennedy versus King. So I recount that story because we still have a long way to go. And the fact that I'm standing here today before such a fantastic, I know the amount of history and people involved in intelligence in this room is mind-boggling. I can just feel it. I am a second-generation intelligence officer. My father was an NCO in the Air Force. My brother was an NCO in the Air Force, and they both did SIGINT. So I kind of grew up in this. I grew up Cub Scout, Boy Scout, ROTC in high school, ROTC in college. Then I became an Air Force officer myself, military analyst, served in Korea, served at Bergstrom Air Force Base, which doesn't exist anymore. If we got any people here from Austin, Texas, it is now Austin Bergstrom International Airport. So along the way, my path was simply, you know, be proud of who you are, be proud of your nation, be proud of this flag, give back. And CIA came calling. After 4 years in the Air Force, I answered an ad in a newspaper article, and it said, write a 1,500-word or less essay on anything that you feel strongly about. I'm a convert to Judaism, so I was writing about the Intifada at the time in the 89-90 time frame. Someone saw that I could put a couple of sentences together and have some reasoned thought. And of course, that started the process whereby 28 years later, I retired as an SIS-4, far exceeding my original plan to walk out the door as I wanted to be a full-bird colonel. I was a military kid, grew up, you know, in Italy and Japan, so that was my baseline, and that's what I understood and knew. But I kind of wanted to start with the Black History and the Black History Month because I think it is important to know that from my perspective, my history is your history. Don't care if you're Black or not Jewish. Your history is my history. Now, I have been called a lot of things over the years. Spy whisperer, without question, is the coolest. So, to whoever on staff came up with the name for today's theme, thank you very much. Okay, I'm looking at her right there. Spy whisperer? Come on. That is so cool. And so the CIA is an espionage service, as everyone knows, and people are either intrigued or repelled by the thought of spying, the notion of spying. So as the head of the operational training facility, which I am unable to name, but I don't think there's anyone in the room who doesn't know what that means. Those are some of the archaic rules that the agency has that don't make a whole lot of sense to anyone, but it is what it is. So I ran it and trained the next generation of clandestine collectors from multiple agencies, from the FBI, from DIA, and of course from CIA. All of the new hires that walked into the director of operations at that time fell up under what was my command. And so I had all the new, fresh, excited bodies for the first 24 months of their time in the agency. I spearheaded with Doug Wise the largest paradigm shift in operational training since the days of the OSS. What is now today called the Operational Tradecraft Course, which was the Field Tradecraft Course for many, many years, actually up until about 2 or 3 years ago. So, who in this audience agrees that relationships are built on trust? Exactly. So, trust is the core of every relationship that we have, whether it's personal, private, intimate, professional. You have to have some semblance of trust for that relationship to exist. So in order for me to talk about what it's like to be the head of training for what we'd use to train, our CIA operatives, and I forgive me for the use of the term operative, I retired out of the senior job. I knew that I wanted to come out from undercover because I knew that there were going to be some possibilities in the entertainment sector that I wanted to be able to take advantage of, and staying undercover just was not going to be in the cards if I wanted to be able to do that. They don't understand case officer or ops officer, and operative is just kind of one of those words that's kind of cool, like spy whisperer. So For the sake of the audience that I'm dealing with on the entertainment front, I'll use the term operative, even though I didn't ever really consider myself that. So, if you will, picture a bullseye, target logo, whatever it is that's going to help you. That center target is who you're looking for. That's the source that you want. And each concentric ring, as it goes out from that center bullseye, is your most intimate contacts, then your personal contacts, then your personal contacts, and the last ring are your professional contacts. And some of them might blend in and have multiple, but just to give you a visual for that. So what you're looking for, of course, is the bullseye. And within the context of human, that is it. That's who you're looking for in the middle. Now, everyone likely came here today wanting to hear some secrets, and that secrets and the revelation of how secrets are actually achieved are diametrically opposing views. So I'm going to start with the fact that espionage is about establishing trust. That is important for everyone to understand. And that the establishing trust with the end goal of entering a secret pact between the spy handler and the recruited spy. As an institution, the CIA has only been involved in this game for a very short period of time. When you compare it to the most famous biblical story and the first documented story of spying, and it's the story of Joshua and Caleb, and who led the Exodus at Moses' direction to go spy out the land of Canaan. So and today I'll share some of the stories that hopefully will answer the 3 questions that were a part of the advertisement for hopefully what brought you here. And those 3 questions were, how do you train someone to spy? How do you collaborate with other countries on spy education and not lose your own secrets? And then finally, how are these things consistently accomplished in a dangerously changing world? I'm a big picture guy with just a thirst of knowledge and hopefully to understand and a keen attention to detail. So I'll be answering these questions in reverse order because I think you need to understand the overall picture before I can get into the training piece of it. So I know there's a lot of knowledge in here of the intelligence community, but for the sake of those who might not have the same background, I'm going to quickly cover some, basically on the history of the CIA. So the CIA is the successor to the Office of Strategic Services, which only existed between 1942 and 1945 during World War II. And we were born out of a state-sponsored terrorist attack that we know as Pearl Harbor, 7 December 1941. So the OSS was disbanded after the end of the war in 1945. 2 years later, President Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947, which for the intelligence community and specifically for CIA is kind of our Bible, our Torah, our Hammurabi Code, however you want to view it, that's what it is for us, National Security Act of 1947. So that created the Central Intelligence Group, which 2 years later became the CIA, and we've maintained that name for more than 70 years now. And the CIA only does 3 things, no matter what you see, hear, or read about. 3 things. We collect, we analyze, and we execute the president's covert action. That's it. And we do that through 5 directorates. The Directorate of Operations, from whence I hail, the Directorate of Science and Technology, the Directorate of Digital Innovation, the Directorate of Support, and the Directorate of Analysis. And they all have one mission. So 5 directorates, 3 missions, 1 objective, to keep us safe and our allies. That's it. So the DO is the DO, or the Directorate of Operations, is the operational arm of the CIA. They're the ones that are always in the newspaper. They're the ones that books and movies and TV shows are created about. And they're the ones who typically are the ones always getting us in trouble as a nation. It is what it is. We were created by the National Security Act of 47 to be that whipping boy of any administration. So the DO measures success by one's ability to recruit new business development. That's what recruiting sources is. And that business has to result in the production of foreign intelligence reports that go to the president, policymakers, all of that. Well, by all measures within the DO, I was a failed case officer. I did not recruit in my first tour. I did not recruit in my second tour. I learned a lot. And it was very good for me, not at the time, but I learned. And eventually I was able, it all started to crystallize and make sense. But at the end of the day, the DO is a result-driven entity, and I didn't live up to anyone's expectations, including my own. So as we move into the first question, is there anyone in the room who doesn't know the adage that, espionage is the second oldest profession, but less reputable than the first? Is there anyone in here who has not heard that before? Well, I tend to think that people are more inclined or less repulsed maybe by the thought of selling your body than they are of selling your soul, which is what people think you're doing when you spy. I never saw it that way, but it always gets a chuckle. And whatever your views are of it, in my 32 years, I know that people thought less of me than they thought of people who had to do what they needed to do to survive. So, how are spying and collaborating with other intelligence services accomplished in a dangerously changing world? I had, I'm just going to say it, Director Brennan and I had philosophical differences on a lot of issues. And one of them was the point that he thought that we are now living in the most dangerous time in the history of the world. And this was 2014 or 15. And I'm thinking, were there not 2 world wars, a Korean War, a Vietnam War? And those are just our wars. I'm not talking about all the other wars or fighting that was going on around the world. I do not believe that we are living in the most dangerous time. I think statistically we might be living in one of the safest times in our history. It's just that the information that comes to us via these spy devices that you all just turned off, hopefully, just the constant bombarding of information. So it's not more dangerous, it's just more accessible, and it just is always in our presence, in our psyche. So the short answer to how we do it in a constantly changing world is that intelligence services have always collaborated with one another. They've always shared. The 12 Israelite tribes that were sent out to spy the land of Canaan all went to different places. They all collected little pieces, and they all brought it back together. That was collaboration. Yes, they were all on the same team, and they weren't from different, services, but it was collaboration from the very beginning. We're able to continue to adjust and shift and change because human nature has not changed since Cain slew Abel. It hasn't. People are born on the wrong side of the track. People are born into a body that they don't believe should be their body. That didn't start with transgender in today's world. It has always existed. And a person like myself is always looking for that anomaly, that person who doesn't feel like they're being listened to, that person who doesn't feel like they fit, that person who feels like they're not being listened to. That's who I'm looking for as a potential spy in whatever area I'm trying to get into. And for the CIA, the heart and soul is human intelligence, or human. Sitting down and looking a person in the eye and convincing that person that your goal is also their goal. Not always easy. But at the end of the day, danger is danger, whether it was faced by the Israelites during the Exodus or by the CIA today in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, yada, yada, yada. So Moses chose Joshua from the Nur tribe, Caleb from the Judah tribe, and the Judah tribe was known for its intelligence gathering and its, being able to decipher secrets, dreams. And much like Moses chose these two to lead that, our administrations since 1942, beginning with FDR, chose the OSS, the CIG, the CIA to be those people who go out and spy out the land of fill in the blank. Not any different. Now, the other thing that's not any different is the 12 tribes, when they came back, 10 of them told Moses, yeah, well, I don't think we can defeat these guys. Joshua and Caleb, however, stood up and reported correctly. And the 10 called for the stoning death of Joshua and Caleb. Now, those same voices that rose up against Joshua and Caleb are still present in today's world in the form of the White House, the press, the Hill, Hollywood, and perhaps even someone in this audience. You just don't know. My point is, it's nothing new. People have always questioned our methodology. People have always questioned our reason. People have always mistrusted who we are as an institution. But the information that led to us finding UBL, that led to us finding al-Baghdadi, that led to us finding whatever secret it is that we're trying to do, is something that's done in very dangerous times over many days, months, or years by an entire group of people who have a similar goal. So how do you collaborate with another service and not lose your competitive edge? Very carefully. That's the first thing. So the British in the OSS days provided General Donovan's trainers with curriculum. So essentially everything that we know as the CIA today is based on the British model. And most of the intelligence and security services of the world today are either based on the British model, the American model, or the Russian model. Every single one at least can be tied back to one of those three institutions. So whether you're in Zimbabwe or whether you're in Austria, the intelligence cycle is the intelligence cycle. Spot, assess, develop, recruit, handle, terminate. I always like to begin with terminate because terminate does not mean what Hollywood thinks terminate means. Terminate does not mean taking somebody out in the alley and putting a bullet in the back of their head. Never seen a CIA person do that, okay? Except for in movies. So doesn't matter where you're from, the methodology, the intelligence cycle is the same, and it's within the DNA of all intelligence services. So I have a kind of a complex and convoluted story, so please bear with me because as I was explaining to my girlfriend, she's like, that's not really clear on how you do this, but I was in the war zone in, I'll just say, in Pakistan, and working and living with our Pakistani partners and colleagues. There was a target that was identified as the most senior Taliban commander, and we needed to capture him. So working with the Pakistanis, we developed a plan, but it just wasn't enough to get us to where we wanted to go. And then one of our Western partners learned who we were chasing and said, well, we have a source that can help you get to this guy. And so we tried to figure out how to use that information because they absolutely refused to allow CIA to share with the Pakistanis the fact that they had a source. So, non-CIA source, Pakistani partners with us in the middle on how to get to this one thing. The only way it was going to be possible was through trust established between us and our Western partners to not share that with the Pakistanis at their request, and to be on the ground with the Pakistanis without revealing the fact that the Westerns. Are we following? All right. We got intelligence professionals in this room. So, sorry, babe. At the end of the day, it took us a while, but the source got captured along with the target, and I'm sure he got compensated well for it. But my point is collaboration between different services and not sharing. So we taught them everything they know, but we didn't teach them everything that we know, and we were able to protect the fact what the Pakistanis didn't want to share, with our Western partners didn't want to share, and at the end of the day, everybody got what they wanted, but it all boils back down to trust and familiarity and being on the streets at the same time. So, I'm going to segue to the third and final question, and then I'm going to open it up to questions because I know there are going to be many. So, human intelligence is what CIA does. That's our mandate. And so, how do you train someone to spy? By establishing trust. The primary role is to recruit, whether you're a CIA case officer, a DIA case officer, and a CIA-trained FBI officer, recruiting spies and producing intelligence. But this requires manipulation. And manipulation is always seen in a negative light. I'm a spy handler. I don't see it the same way. I don't see it as necessarily a negative thing. But we build and establish trust at the very beginning through our training, through the schoolhouse. What we're looking to identify for case officers like myself are people out there who are interested in joining the CIA who have similar intellectual, social, and personality traits of those people who have successfully made it through the program in the past. Whether you're a CMO, a collection management officer, whether you're a staff operations officer, whether you're a case officer or a targeter, it doesn't matter. What they're comparing it against is those people who have achieved some measure of success to say that, yes, this gentleman right here has everything it takes to be able to do this. Now, I used to caution the students as they were coming through, it's not a checklist. You can check all 99 of the things on that list and not make it through the field tradecraft course, or you can check a third of them and fly through. It really is, it's a marker. It's just a tool that we use. But the intellectual, social, and personality traits are what we're looking for. And then we impress upon that, you gotta have integrity. You gotta have people with as close to unimpeachable, character as you can possibly find. No one is unimpeachable, of course. But that is what we're looking for. So we build trust through our training curriculum, through the execution of tradecraft, and trust must exist between the spy and the spy handler, between the intelligence service that the spy handler belongs to, between the partnerships between intelligence services, but for me, the most important one is between the CIA and the American people. That trust has been broken many times over many years. But I'm telling you that the CIA there's no such thing as a rogue elephant. That's a term from the 70s. I never really understood it. We have more oversight than any other government institution. We have more people looking at us. Even in today's world, we can get away with a lot less than we did back in the Dulles era in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and of course church commissions and all that in the 70s. We're trustworthy people. So if you're having difficulty viewing CIA as the harbinger of trustworthy folks, you're not the first and you won't be the last. But if the foundation of espionage is trust, how do you reconcile that with one's moral compass? And I'll close with a story from when I was dean of the spy school and did a recruitment center visit to Norfolk State, which is a historically black college and university down in the Tidewater area of Virginia. And there was this young man who, I was manning a booth, a job fair booth, and I saw this young man for the entire time that I was out, and he kept kind of walking by and looking, but he didn't want to approach. And so I got to a point where there was nobody that was at the podium, and kind of waved him over, and I said, clearly you have questions, and that's what we're here to answer anything that you might have. How can you work with people who did experiments on black people in the 60s? Bam, just no preamble, no, hey, nice to meet you, no, tell me about the CIA, just bam, right in the face. And I said, well, yeah, we've been accused of that and far worse. If you want to talk about history, we can talk about history. If you want to talk about job opportunities for young black men and women today or people of color, I'm your guy. So he kind of looked at me again. He wasn't completely convinced. Looks at me again, he says, what are you looking for in new employees? Integrity. He's like, literally, the look on his face was priceless. He's like, but don't you guys lie, cheat, and steal? And I said, absolutely, but never to the American public. And he's like, I don't believe that. And I said, it's not really a question of whether you believe it or not. That's my experience. Does everybody tell the truth every time? No. No one in the history of mankind has told the truth every time to everybody. It's unnatural. It doesn't work. I don't think I convinced that young man. I'm sure he's not a CIA officer now. That was more than probably, that was a decade ago. But I think I was able to show him that what he thought CIA was might not necessarily be the real CIA, that there's always more to the story, that there's always something else out there that maybe they didn't know or consider, and that at the end of the day, would you rather have people of good character, moral, and integrity out doing questionable business, or people with questionable morals out doing questionable business? So this young man didn't embrace CIA or my hiring pitch, but he left thinking the possibility he believed he knew about CIA was wrong or at least incomplete. And that's how we train our operatives to think. Question authority. Question the premise of assumptions of others. Question the information you receive internally and or externally. And that's the crux of what okay, blow it up.
Don't literally blow it up, just make it larger.
So I didn't talk a lot about my own personal part of it because it was in the advert. But I served in Niger, Senegal, Morocco, Nigeria, Uganda, Pakistan, Switzerland, just as it was announced. And I raised two fantastic children. One graduated from high school in Uganda, one graduated high school in Switzerland. One's an artist and married in Seattle, the other's a social worker in Chicago. And both of them are absolutely never, ever going to be CIA officers. Yes, ma'am, you have a question?
Did you do anything in your career that you felt compromised you, ever?
No. That's an easy one, absolutely not. Now, there were operations that I either cut off because there were, one specifically comes to mind that would have resulted, that almost assuredly would have resulted in the target being killed by his own country. There were too many variables. There were too many things that we couldn't control. And I, on 3 separate occasions, tried to shut this CO from bringing it up again. And I finally did, but that would have been something that it would have weighed heavily on my conscience for a long time. So my answer is absolutely, absolutely not. Yes, sir.
Would you say a few words about the information in the Post today regarding the crypto? Are you aware of that? And
I did. I literally have seen no news this morning. Is it not cryptocurrency?
No, the idea was there was a Swiss company called Crypto that was owned secretly by the CIA and German intelligence, and they were providing cryptography devices to other countries.
And one of those artifacts is from our collection that was photographed.
It is extremely weird to be 28 years undercover and not ever being able to talk about CIA, and then transitioning to a world where I only talk about CIA, whether I'm doing that on ABC News, on Good Morning America, and I think the last time I was on was in the aftermath of the Soleimani strike. And talking to audiences that clearly don't have the background that you have living here, California is not as, they're different. But different in a good way. I'm just a nice Georgia boy, okay? I'm just a country kid from Augusta, GA, and my world has always been shifting, and I tell Californians that it was a culture shock moving to LA, and not any different than when I moved to Niamey, or quite frankly, not any different than Mogadishu in some sense. Hollywood is a brutal place. What was the question? I'm going to have to pass on that one. I do have knowledge, and I just would rather not. I can't go there.
I'm going to take the microphone to this person who I think is stuck in a row, and then I'm going to ask a question.
Thank you. Thank you for talking to us. Would you? I have so many questions, but one is I'm curious about the ethnic breakdown of the CIA, and I'm also curious if you would give us an example of how the training works. Are you doing defensive driving, guns, surveillance? I mean, just what is the curriculum amount to, and when does someone wash out?
So when I visited the Spy Museum, I was here last spring for ABC News, and one of the investigative journalists asked me, "Have you been to the Spy Museum?" I'm like, "Yep, been to the Spy Museum." He said, "No. Have you been to the new Spy Museum, International Spy Museum?" So he arranged a VIP tour for me. I came over with a good friend of mine who's in the back of the auditorium right now, and we just had it was an amazing visit. But during that visit, the lady that was working with us saw that I knew a lot of the people that were flashing up on the screen, and she's like, "Will you come speak for us?" And I said, "Let's talk and figure out the timing." And I was extremely honored to be a part of the Black History Month part of it. But I only have 2 red lines when I'm dealing with Hollywood and when I'm dealing with talking to audience. I don't talk about the curriculum at the school. It's what keeps us safe. It's what separates us from the others, and that's our competitive edge. That I can't. But we do defensive driving. We do weapons, and those are mostly for people who are going out to really, really dangerous places or going to war zone areas. And people wash out of the program for any number of reasons. They can't adapt to this. They know it's a fake model, but it's a fake model that is built and based on real world events over many, many years and constantly updated and adjusted to adapt to, whatever time frame, pre 9/11, post 9/11 is probably the biggest paradigm right now. But a lot of it has to do with people who are just caught up in this concept that Hollywood has got it right, and they haven't. So they come in thinking about CIA one way, and I tell them, just be the person that we hired. Don't go down there trying to be what you think they want. So just adjusting and adapting and recognizing that what you think you know about it and what we're going to teach you are not the same thing. Sorry to kind of dance around that, but that's about as close to talking about schoolhouse that I feel comfortable doing.
Wait,
and then
could you?
Ma'am?
She asked about.
So I can't talk about the agency writ large, but within the DO. Quick story. So when I was the deputy director of the Counterterrorism Center, the DDO at the time came to me and he said, I got a favor to ask of you. I'm like, boss, you're the boss. It's not called a favor. Just tell me what it is that you want. And he says, I want you to meet the cast and crew of Homeland. I'm like, come on, no, anything but that. I just didn't. I love the show. I just saw no utility in doing that. I did it. He's the boss. And unfortunately, I walked into the meeting probably it was already going on for 20 or 30 minutes. I was in an actual meeting. So, but when I came in, literally every eye turned and looked at me, and I'm like, "Oh, I apologize for being late." They said, "No, this is perfect timing." They wanted a senior DO officer to answer this question. And I said, "Well, what's the question?" They said, "Well, what's different? Well, how long have you been in the agency?" I think it was 22 years at that point. No, 24. What's changed between when you walked in the door and now? And I looked around the room. I said, Israeli, British, and I pointed out all the nationalities that were on the cast and crew of Homeland and said, I'm sitting in a room with foreign nationals on the 7th floor of CIA headquarters talking to people who pretend to be us but aren't us. And of course, people started laughing. I said, that would have never happened 24 years ago. I said, but honestly, the real thing that has changed is when I walked in the door, there was zero examples of any people of color or women that were division chiefs. And within the DO, rising up to the level of division chief was what every good case officer wanted to do. Well, that's not true. Some people just want to do the work. And you can do the work as division chief if there are any former division chiefs in here. But at the end of the day, it was, I think I lost the thread of the end. Oh, so, and then I explained, but now we have, at that point, my counterparts were a Puerto Rican guy running LA division, a Korean American running EA division, me running Africa division, 3 women running other divisions. And so I said, we're much more diverse, we're much more effective, we're much more efficient than we were 25 years ago. And it has to do with hiring and trying to recruit people that represent, and I don't think you need to have, only black officers or an AF. In fact, when I walked in the door, because I had grown up in Japan and because I had served in Korea, I knew I was going to EA. There was no way in the world that I was going to be the black dude going to Africa. I just simply refused to be that guy. And then I met a gentleman that has a mustache like this, Mr. Stewart right here, and his name was Bill Mosby. And Bwana was a force of nature. A guy from rural Pennsylvania, close your eyes and vision, a great white hunter of the 19th century. I'm literally just burnt. I mean, that was Bwana. That man knew more about Africa than anybody on the planet. More importantly, I was at it was some division party going on, and he knew everyone's name. He didn't know everyone, not only their names, he knew the spouses' names, he knew the kids' names, he knew their pets. He knew I'm not kidding. And there was nobody standing behind Bwana saying, this is Darrell coming up and this is where he served. He knew everybody. That to me meant that was family. And I was so drawn to this one guy and to grow up and actually do the job that he did when I first met. I literally got goosebumps right now. Love Bill Mosby. That man changed my life. And so he was a perfect example of you don't have to have a black guy out there doing something Africa or an Asia guy in Asia. I can train anyone in this room to go anywhere in the world and do the work that we need to do. But you do have to have you got to have diversity. And not just diversity in color, diversity in thought, diversity in experiences. All of those count. So we are more diverse. When I made it to the SIS ranks, I think I was number 11, but when I walked out the door, there were 5. So I don't know if it's backsliding. I think it's just timing and a whole bunch of other things, but I think they're doing better. And to John Brennan's credit, John Brennan, Director Brennan, was serious about doing those things and making sure that we were hiring the right people. And yes, ma'am.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming in today. I have a very basic question.
Yes, ma'am.
A couple years ago, I took a river cruise from Moscow to St. Petersburg. On my iPhone, I do have the name, address, phone number, and email of a very special person who works for our No Such agency. I decided to leave all of my electronics at home for fear of what might be picked up, and took only a straight, regular digital camera. Did I make the right decision?
Absolutely 100%. Yes, ma'am, you did. Listen, the CIA is not the only person in the game. Everybody is out there doing the same thing that we're doing it, but they don't have the same, they do it differently. The Chinese, if you travel into China, whatever you have on any electronics is theirs. They already own OPM and Equifax and all these others too, so I'm not really sure it matters that much, but I always recommend to people who are traveling, whether you're business, whether it's river cruises, if you don't need to take that device, and phones aren't just phones anymore. There's more information on your phone than in your home. You would rather someone break into your home than steal your phone. Trust me, you would much rather me break into your home than get a hold of your phone, because I got your phone, I got you, period. Henceforth, now and forevermore, until you change your phone, and then I'll have to get it another way. But yes, she made the right decision. And I'm glad that you were astute enough to recognize that you can go have fun and travel and be safe and have a phone and not be taken advantage of by intelligence. Let me get
These
to
guys have been waiting.
this side. Yes, sir.
Okay, by way of introduction, I'm not in the intelligence community, nor have I been, but I did spend 23 years in the infantry, and I was a user of intelligence. Yes, my daughter, however, is in the intelligence community. My question is about your cover stories. Anytime you were undercover, particularly the one that was mentioned earlier in your introduction about your musical cover.
Right. So the musical cover was actually Lucian Bruggerman was the ABC journalist who wrote the article. He had listened to a podcast that I did in Washington, and the tagline that came out of that was, singing is hard, spying is easy. And so he saw that, and he wanted to interview me on my love of music. So music was my first love. I sang from 4th grade all the way through the University of Georgia Men's Glee Club, and with 2 bands, one in Senegal and one in Uganda. Now, I was undercover the entire time as a State Department official. I didn't have, band cover. I just sang in a band because that's what I love to do, and it introduced me into an entirely different group of people of interest that I had never considered before. And without getting into a lot of details, it was very good for us, it was very good for our nation, for me to be exposed to some people that I might not otherwise have been exposed to. So cover within the CIA is not like cover in the FBI. If you're in the FBI and you're an undercover and you have to become Donnie Brasco, you actually have to be a mafioso. You have to do some things to get, that's not the same for someone who is undercover under State Department working as a political officer or issuing visas somewhere in the world. So the band thing was just more of a journalistic spin to it. And it was, we were the biggest thing in Uganda at the time. whatever that means, but that's kind of the gist of the article. And if you haven't seen it, it's singer, tailor, soldier, spy. Okay, so I didn't name it, but it is it's not as cool as Spy Whisperer, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. Did I answer your question? Yes, ma'am.
Given the White House's fairly amazing lack of respect for the intelligence community and the CIA.
I love these questions.
Sorry.
No. I get them. I get them frequently.
Does it affect morale? I assume it does. And has it affected ability to recruit?
I don't know if I can answer the second one, but I don't think we're running into people who want to come into I don't think there's a problem with people who are interested in joining the CIA. I've worked for every president from Reagan to Trump. Trump is different. And I don't say that in an anti-Trump way, because honestly, every president who takes that office has zero idea the challenges and the threats that are out there. So I give them a pass that first year, maybe even that first 2 years, because again, you're talking about a guy who came from zero, knew nothing about the intelligence community, and has to deal with the amount of things that anyone that sits in the Oval is going to have to deal with. One of the best responses to the saw where you went to for the question you asked is there's an article that Sue Gordon did in the last 2 weeks where she talked about, as her number 2 job at the DNI, briefing the president, how much she enjoyed it, because she actually had to dig back deep into the roots of all of her training to explain to this guy who really knew nothing but wants to understand. And I do believe he wants to understand. I don't think he always wants to understand for the same reasons that we do as an intelligence community. But he's not the person that's being depicted, just like Bush wasn't the person that was depicted, or Obama. Don't make these folks one-dimensional. The problem that I have with our current administration is when he stood up before that wall on day 1 of his administration, for me, that was the problem. And yes, the intelligence community has always been kind of like the punching boy, but we're getting a lot of bruises, a lot more. There are a couple of believed things that I never witnessed. I never saw poor morale in the agency, and that might be because I lived in Africa. I served in Africa Division, which typically has high morale because you're serving in tough places and you just kind of coalesce and work together more closely. That we were risk averse. I never saw that. Not once in 27 years, because it took me, 26 years, because it took me 2 in the pipeline to get out. Not once did I ever have any operation that was turned down because we were afraid that it was going to come known to whomever. Not once. Now, I'm sure other people had an experience where that happened, but that was not my experience. So I never saw being risk averse. So being risk averse, and the last one was that CIA had lost its way, that CIA was more involved in paramilitary operations than any other time. We are a paramilitary organization since 1942, period. The same folks that created, when we broke up in 1945, we split off into 2 groups, current day Special Forces, current day CIA. That spear, designed by General Donovan, represents some people who served in Special Forces and CIA. Same roots. That's it. Paramilitary never went away. There's never been a conflict in the history of CIA where we didn't have paramilitary boots on the ground. Now, you see 9/11, and you see Afghanistan, and you see the focus on counterterrorism, but inside, counterterrorism is just one thing. Counterproliferation is important. Iran's important. North Korea is important. Russians are important. Chinese are important. It's more than just CT. That's what the world sees because, it's oh my God, there's the threat. It is what it is. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir.
One of the things I appreciate and respect most about your service in particular was your focus on your area of operations. As you know, we came up immersed in the experience and the mystique of the Cold War.
Yes, sir.
And then we're immersed in the global war on terror, specifically focusing on the Middle East and Central Asia. I was wondering if you could take a few minutes to explain to us what your assessment is of what is strategically imperative to the national interest as it relates to Africa.
Okay. So when I talk about Africa, people think that we're out chasing African sources. We're not. We need to know what's going on in that country. The ambassador relies on the station chief and the CMO to be the person to know more about that country than anybody else outside of the ambassador, and we always know more than the ambassador. Strategically, China, I don't think China is the problem that everybody believes it's going to be, because the China are never going to assimilate into whatever society in which they work. The CIA, with all its warts and all its, with all its flaws, we go native. That's what we have to be able to do. So when the Cold War ended, it was easy to go after one bear. That's what I did. I was a Soviet military weapons analyst, because everyone that was on the other side had Soviet weapons. Even the Chinese based their weapons off of what the Soviets did. So knowing that was a good baseline. And then when that model went away, and then all of a sudden this multi-headed hydra who chop off one head and 10 more spring out of it, in the form of Al-Qaeda, in the form of Al-Shabaab, in the form of Boko Haram, in the form of fill in the blank. Those are problem sets that can be looked at in the same model in which you went after the Russians or the Chinese. I don't see it as any different. The difference is it was a whole lot easier to recognize a Soviet weapon system or a Soviet uniform, whereas Al-Qaeda is not walking around with, here's my Al-Qaeda card, and it doesn't exist. So in that sense, it got a little more difficult. But for me, the strategic thing in Africa is and a very wise man just told me this last night, some of the 10 largest economies growing in the world are in the African continent. Resources, everybody only thinks in terms of oil, but there are some things in Zaire, and yes, I still call it Zaire. It was Zaire when I walked in the door, and they may be the Democratic Republic of Congo, but they ain't democratic, and I ain't never gonna call them DRC, so Zaire. Zaire has some minerals out there that don't, literally, if you're a Black Panther fan, I can't remember what is that thing? No, I know Wakanda, but we got a young guy in the audience. What's the thing that you don't know? Whatever that mineral that they have in Black Panther that makes them, there's stuff like that in Zaire that weapon systems can only use that. How can that not be important to us? We talk about wanting to counter Russia and China. If we're going to counter Russia and China, we're going to have to go back to the model of the Cold War, because that's where it was fought on the African continent. And if we pull out there, we are just ceding. We're literally just giving it to them. I don't give ground, not to the Chinese or the Russians, not ever. Sorry, did I answer your question? And yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have a question about, you mentioned CIA going native, and you've traveled, you were assigned to a lot of these different countries. Mm-hmm. But how is there assimilation unless you really know the languages? Because otherwise you're getting, it interpreted for you, not only language, but right. How the words, so in the training, you don't want to get in too much training, but it seems like knowing the language to assimilate, to be right. able to have good communications, which doesn't strike me as possible, as you had all these assignments at different places, mm-hmm. and your trainees coming in, do you spend much time on at least a foreign language for them? So I'm just curious of how do you assimilate when you can't possibly know all these languages? Right,
so on the recruitment side, and there was a question earlier, we're doing a lot better of finding people who are walking in the door with near native, if not native, language capabilities across the spectrum. Now, when we went into Afghanistan and we had people who needed to speak Dari, guess what? We already had Persian speakers. Persian speakers and Dari speakers know just enough, there's enough similarities that we were able to put an entire cadre of Farsi, Persian-speaking officers into the theater, so there was no language problem. Well, everyone out there doesn't speak the language, but enough of them do. And the interpreters that we have are Americans. These aren't Afghans. These are American citizens of Afghan nationality who speak both languages native. So it's not like they're not staff officers, but as far as the CIA is concerned, if they're out there side by side with us, they are CIA. So we have people who already speak the language, and if we don't have them in the doors, we go out and find them. So when something crops up in Yemen, guess what? The Yemeni dialect of Arabic. I don't know how many Yemeni communities there are in the United States, but I know there are quite a few, and so we start tapping into those. And I'll just very quickly, so I grew up speaking Japanese, but the Japanese population between Okinawa and San Antonio, Texas kind of dipped, so I didn't use it, and I lost that capability. They taught me French, and I was able to use that in Niger, Senegal, Morocco, and in Switzerland. So the Romance languages, Latin America, got any LA officers in here from the agency? LA officers go to Latin America and never resurface. They literally never come back anyway. They only want to stay in Latin America. They go from Paraguay to Uruguay to Panama, and they just boom, 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 boom. So they can serve their entire career speaking that language, and if they don't know it, we can teach it to you. So we have people who come in with a lot more language capabilities than maybe in previous decades. Thank you.
Yes, I had a friend, I'll call her Karen because her name is Karen. She had a terrible relationship with her father.
Yes.
He was extremely secretive. He would disappear for periods of time. He was sort of half there and half not there as a family leader. When he died, they found out he was with the CIA. They found out by finding documents locked in places and such, and that sort of thing. And so you talked about trust. I'm interested in what you, as an organization, communicate to the people that work for you, because you're dealing with a whole person who has a business life, but they also have a family. In some cases, have a family life, and how that intertwines and what your experience or training is related to that.
So I'm going to answer your question. I mentioned earlier that I had 2 red lines when I came out. One of them was the schoolhouse. The other one is the NOC program. Karen's father, from everything that you just said, sounds like he was part of our non-official cover cadre. And it's a special cadre that's been around for a long time. It is up to the individual officer to decide when they're going to share with their children the fact that they are, that there's more to than their mom or dad than they might have known. Now, every person has to choose. I mean, my son and my daughter were in 2 very different places when I told them, and quite frankly, 2 very different ages. The one thing that I did see when I ran the, I almost said the words, when I ran the iconic training facility, I would meet with the spouses of the officers who were going to be going down or going to the going to training. This is not as easy as it looks. Going to the training, and 6 runnings of the course, 4 times, a spouse, 3 women and 1 guy got up and walked out of the room. Literally, like, I didn't know you were in CIA. How you can join an institution and not share the fact that you're CIA with the person that you have committed your entire life, that's not the type of person that that's just idiotic. It's stupid, it's unhelpful, it's wrong. Now, the father-daughter not getting along, and there's probably other things, and a lot of what we do as operations officers looks like illegal activity. In fact, espionage is illegal activity, but it looks like a drug deal going on, a brush pass, a secret meeting. A lot of people use this in order to have affairs, because guess what? You go away for a little while, and which is why you have to have people with good integrity. I'm not saying everybody who's had an affair is not a person of good moral character, because things happen and people are people. But if that's what your goal is, if you're going to use these skills for evil, that's not the type person we have. And quite frankly, if you don't trust your spouse enough to share with them that you are CIA, maybe you shouldn't be CIA. Did I answered the spouse part of it and the child part of it. So I have two really long stories that I'm not going to tell, but it's about when I told my kids about me being CIA. The most important thing is that both of them asked me the first question, and it was 5 years apart in these stories. The first question was, is it dangerous? Because in a child, that's what you're constantly, I know Dad's a little bit different, and I'm not going to be able to put my finger on it, but is it dangerous? Which I always thought was really interesting. And I had to not tell them the whole truth. So anyway, yes, sir.
So at the beginning, you spoke a lot about trust and collaboration. Around the time of 9/11, there was a lot of criticism about the lack of communication between the various protective agencies that are in the country. Are you convinced, and can you assure us that things in that arena between FBI, CIA, et cetera, have improved to a satisfactory degree?
Short answer is yes. And here's why. We've always, so the fight between the CIA and FBI goes back to Hoover time frame, when the CIA was expanding into areas overseas, and the only place that we didn't win the battle with was in Latin America, because the FBI refused to give up this hemisphere as their sphere of influence. I first worked with the FBI during a domestic tour in the Midwest in 1994, 7 years before 9/11. There's the level of mistrust, or level of not really sure that you're telling me everything, is almost non-existent now. A lot of it is because we talk about it in the training now, not just at CIA, but in the FBI Academy. They are integrating their analysts and their field agents. During my time of running our schoolhouse, I worked with my counterpart at the FBI to make sure that our curriculums, our curriculums don't need to be the same, because we're not law enforcement and they're not in intelligence service, but at least acclimating to people the fact that you're going to be involved with people who we're not looking to put somebody in jail, we're looking to follow this thread of information to get the next guy up. So on a day-to-day level, as a station chief in the second largest location in the U.S., I can tell you that my officers were meeting with an FBI agent and a source, or meeting with an FBI agent about meeting a source every single day of my 3 years. And that's just one place. Now, abroad, they do it as well. The legats and the station chiefs are a part of the country team. It's constant. Headquarter level, field level. Can people slip through? A crook is always going to find a loophole to a good law, or a good lock. As soon as a lock is made, there are people out there trying to figure out how to beat that lock. Every lock, whatever. Every system that's ever been designed, someone like me is looking at it, trying to figure out how to deconstruct it. It's a part of it, and we have to collaborate because we can't do it alone. There's no doing it alone. 9/11 happened for a lot of reasons. And it wasn't just the fact that FBI wasn't talking to CIA or CIA wasn't talking to FBI. We were. It's just that the FBI, so here's a huge difference between FBI and CIA. In the CIA, everything we report goes back to the mothership. In the FBI, the mothership is New York field office, because they think so, or LA field office, because they think so. I might send this information back to FBI headquarters. They don't have to. We have to. We absolutely have to. And a lot of that happened as well, where people like, well, I don't want to share. This is a good case. I don't want to share it with someone else, because somebody else might come in. Now people don't care about the credit. We just care about, completing whatever objective it is that we're trying to do. I would venture to say that what has happened in my, over my 28 years, 30 now, good Lord, since I walked in 1990, there's almost no separation. There's no, FBI and CIA are talking every single day all over the globe about keeping us safe.
Darrell?
Yes, ma'am.
I was reading, you've got time.
Yep.
I'm watching.
I'm being respectful.
No, I love that. I was reading an interesting article today about misinformation, disinformation being put out around the coronavirus by places that would like to keep the globe unstable. I wondered if you had any experience with that during the Ebola crisis.
Not to the level that exists right now. So when the Ebola virus broke out, I was first in the Counterterrorism Center front office and then Chief of Africa Division. And we were afraid that people were going to try and weaponize it, that people were going to try and, get there and have their, and take it and spread it around the world. But we talked to the scientists. We talked to the analysts. We talked to CDC. We talked to the people that mattered. We had a presence on the ground, which was literally right in the middle of the Ebola hot zone. And what was impressive to me is I had a first-time COS who was a GS-13, which if you're a GS-13 and you're a station chief, God bless you, because it is way beyond what my capabilities were as a GS-13. But this was a very, very solid officer. And he was back on, actually on paternity leave. His son was like a week old, and he's like, I'm ready to take my family back in. I'm like, you realize there's an Ebola virus breakout, and you're like in the middle of the hot zone. I'm not comfortable sending you back, much less you and a newborn infant. But we worked it out. He went back. He did what needed to be done, and nobody was ever exposed to anything. It's never as onerous or as ominous as people make it out to be. So take China. It has now surpassed the number of people who were killed by SARS. I think they're up in the 800 number, but that's 800 out of 1.5 or 6 billion people. Billion. 800, 1.5 billion. 3% mortality rate, meaning you have a 97% chance of living. So if the entire world were to die, that 3%, that would be huge. I get that. But it's not going to happen. It's not, I don't want to say it's not a threat, because it can be a threat, but it's never as bad as the misinformation and disinformation. So and when somebody brings something, I'm like, what did CDC say? What did the World Health Organization say? Because those are a collaboration of scientists from the United States and Asia and Europe and Africa and a whole bunch of people who are looking at this from a perspective that's not ours. We don't have the answer to everything, which means we have to rely on people who literally spend their entire lives doing nothing but tracking viruses and Ebolas and things like this. I defer to them. Very, very smart, trained people who can figure it out. And the misinformation, I don't think, has hit the websites like CDC and WHO. They can be hacked, so you always have to, keep going back. But don't travel into China right now. I would not travel in, and carry Purell. I'm not one of these guys who walk around washing my hands all the time, but I am now, because I've been on a couple of flights over the last couple of days, and when you're in a tuna can breathing other people's air, then you take a little precautions. I wouldn't be too overly concerned about it.
No, I was more interested in the manipulation of the news. So.
Right. One of the reasons I retired is because, quite frankly, the information age and the disinformation age is at a level that I can't. I'm not that bright. I can't wrap my brain around the level of dissension that's being sowed just for the sake of keeping people off balance. Who thinks like that? Putin. Xi, maybe not Xi in this one, but Putin for sure. Yeah. Not a good guy.
Yes, I wanted to ask about the infographic too, especially the center part.
The central part? Okay, so my progression through the agency, I broke down into kind of 3 areas. My first 10 years in, where I was learning the craft, schoolhouse, applying it in the field. So the next 9 or 10 years is moving into middle management, and then my last 9 or 10 years were all at the SIS strategic level. So instead of being involved in day-to-day operations, my job was to take care of the people. And so some of the stories that I was able to share were based on failures, my personal and professional failures, that I didn't know were going to resonate with the folks who were running our leadership development staff, who asked me to come in and prepare a presentation that I could start giving to our GS-15 cadre, who were all interested in going into making it into the SIS ranks. So everyone at CIA now, no matter what directorate, if you want to be considered for promotion to the general ranks, has to take this course. And I was one of the DO speakers that would go and talk. And the thing that I would stress to them is you need to remember those things that are important to you. What are those things that are important to you? You know what's important to the agency. You know why you walked in the door. So unless you literally sit down and start thinking about, okay, this is important to me, this isn't important to me. Now, the things that are important to me, I keep two things with me. This is my moral compass, my personal values, and what's important to me. This is with me all the time. The other thing that I keep is a copy of the U.S. Constitution. You know why? Because it matters. It matters in everything that I did as a case officer. It matters in everything that I do in life. And that's just how I think, and that's the message that I was trying to get across to the people, to understand that this isn't about you. The day you walk in the door, it's not about you anymore. The hiring process is about you, and your retirement is about you. Everything else is about protecting our nation. And as soon as I starts to come into what I want, me, that's when I can't use you anymore. Don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. So, no, I was very serious about this, and I would tell the folks when they're walking in the door, I would tell them at the retirement, now it's about you, but not everything in between. So those are the 10 things that were important to me. Human is what separates CIA. Listen, CIA is not the only one out there doing collection of human intelligence. Military is doing it. NSA is in the SIGINT side of the house, but human, personal contact, that's what we do. That's what separates us from the others. And some of this was born out of one of my failures, and I think I'll probably end with this story. So I went out as a base chief in my 5th tour, and I was ready. I thought I was ready. The job that I bid on was me and a communications officer, so basically 2 officers. I can handle that. By the time I got there a year later, I had 3 second tour case officers. One described to me as a water walker. One described to me as a CO who wasn't sure that she still wanted to be a CO. And the third one was, just don't let him get anybody killed. So just think about managing that spectrum of capabilities. Well, at the end of that two-year tour, they sent me to a leadership course where at the end of the week, there was a little surprise that was thrown in there. Basically, there was an observer in there matching up what they witnessed personally during that week of a whole, literally sun up to sundown exercises and all these things that you do in leadership training courses. But there's one person, their job was to do nothing but watch you and look at what was reported from your 360 feedback that you had to be a part of for this training and see whether, is Darrell the person that his peers, colleagues, and direct reports say he is? Well, in my case, unfortunately, it was. And so the clinical psychologist came to me and he looks at me and he says, "Are you ready to listen?" I was like, "Yeah, of course I'm ready to listen." Like, no. Are you ready to listen? Now, I don't know how many of you think that a conversation that starts with, "Are you ready to listen?" is going to end up well to the listenee. It did not. And I may have heard the first 3 to 4 minutes of probably a 20-minute, walk with this guy, him explaining the feedback, what it meant. And what it meant was, it was crushing. I wasn't the officer that I thought I was. Genghis Khan, Pol Pot, Hitler, micromanager, know-it-all. Those are the good ones. But I recognized in that moment that if I didn't change who I was, I wouldn't be able to rise up and do the things that I wanted to do and be. So I told that story, and they were like, "Oh my God, that's a great story, you gotta tell it." But that's not the end of it. So I'm walking around and feeling I'm not happy at all. And so at the end of the day, and I was married for 27 years, and I called my wife at the time, and I'm like, just had the worst day of my life. She's like, "Okay, tell me about it." And I did, and I realized there was complete silence on the other end of the phone. So, like, did you not hear what I just told you? She's like, "Yeah, I got a couple questions for you." I said, "Okay." She said, "Well, how long have you known that clinical psychologist?" I said, "Well, I just showed up. I mean, I was here on Sunday, so 4 days." She said, "Okay. And the people that work for you, like you were there with me 2 years." She said, "Okay. I've been telling you the same thing for 14 years, and you expect me to feel bad for you?" So just imagine this. I'm gut punched by this feedback, and I'm on the ground, and I'm being kicked. It was painful. It was painful. But I learned from it. I grew from it. We later divorced, but I think I became a better husband. I know I became a better father. I'm proof positive because I'm standing here that I became a better leader. And all of that boiled down to the fact that I learned how to listen for the first time in my life. And if all of you out there, if you think in fact, we'll do this. How many of you think you're a good listener? Raise your hands. No, seriously, raise your hands. Now, those people with those hands up, I want you to go home and find your loved one, your children, whatever it is, and ask them the same question: "Do you think I'm a good listener?" You're probably not. The thing is, we think we're good listeners, but you teach your children what? How to walk, how to talk, how to use a fork and spoon, how to ride a bicycle, but you don't teach someone how to listen. I learned it the hard way, and the agency ultimately paid for me to go out to be an internal coach for officers. And in coaching, you learn how to listen. Listening takes so much more energy than it does to speak. And every one of us has been in that conversation where the other person is just doing this, and they're not listening. All they're doing is waiting for their turn to speak. And that's not listening. And I would teach that to folks. When you recognize that that's going on, just stop the conversation. Tell that person when you're not tuned in. You're not, I know you're not. Just go get a glass of water, come back in 15, whatever it is, just break that. And now I'm here I need you to listen. And listening's tough. Listening is tough. And I'm still not the best listener, but I've improved, and I'm constantly working on it.
Darrell?
Yes, ma'am.
We have really enjoyed listening to you.